Presentation without some AV problems, right? Welcome. Thanks everyone for coming out this morning. And I think we have a great program today. Our first speaker is going to be Jack Ubinger, a Braver Angels volunteer moderator who will speak on the challenges of polarization in America and what we the people can do to counter it. Jack is a retired environmental lawyer and conflict resolution educator. He's represented the interest of private sector and worked in the nonprofit sector to solve environmental problems through effective policy change. For 25 years, Jack developed and taught a graduate level course, Environmental Conflict Resolution and Problem Solving, at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. Currently, he's the co-leader of the Collier-Lee chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby and recently helped facilitate the creation of the Southwest Florida EcoAlliance. I think you need a few more things on your plate, Jack. So without further ado, take it away, Jack.
Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here this morning. This is sort of the topic of our times, I guess. And so while we're getting the PowerPoint set up, just let me say, as you can tell from the introduction, I'm a recovering lawyer and a conflict resolution educator and practitioner. There's a link between those two things. I had an epiphany about a third of the way through my legal career. I started practicing in 1973. That was the very beginning of the formation of the environmental regulatory structure that we now have and has been evolving ever since then. And in those days, I represented industry. And I am conservative, I'll say that up front. I represented industry, and our clients were very much of the mind that environmental rules were not in their interest, and they wanted to litigate every rule. And so that was my job, to go to court and litigate. In 1987, Pennsylvania had a new governor, Robert Casey, the father of Senator Casey from Pennsylvania, who was just defeated in the last election. And he appointed a guy named Arthur Davis to be the secretary of, in those days, called the Department of Environmental Resources. And the custom in Pennsylvania was that the new secretary would go to the State Bar Association and speak there, and then he'd go to the prominent county bar associations. And so he came to Pittsburgh, and he opened his presentation with a question. He said, "Why is it that we cannot resolve an environmental issue until it's litigated to the highest court and back, and sometimes back again?" It was very provocative. I mean, it was sort of like, wow. And he went on to say, "I think there's a better way of doing this than litigating everything." So after that, I was having a beer with the chairman of the environmental committee of our bar association, and I said, "That was really pretty provocative." He said, "It really was." I said, "Maybe we should think about that." He said, "Good. I want you to form an ad hoc committee. This is in the no good deed goes unpunished category. Form an ad hoc committee and see what we can do. And we will write a report and send it back to the secretary." So I got 10 or 11 pretty well seasoned environmental lawyers, a couple of environmental advocates, a couple of in-house lawyers from corporations, a couple of people like me that were practicing in law firms that represented corporations. And I had no idea how to start the meeting. So I just said, "All right, so we all have been practicing for 10, 15 years. How do you solve environmental problems without litigating?"
What?
And that was the response. And that really struck me. I thought the question was provocative. That answer was really provocative. And so that launched me on a quest to figure out how you do that. And so I did some work in workshops at Harvard, MIT program on negotiation, Accord, which was a environmental conflict resolution outfit in Washington, Resolve, which is I did these workshops. And in 1990, Duquesne came along and said, "Well, we're going to do this program for called Environmental Science Management, and we want you to help us put the curriculum together, and we want you to teach environmental law." And I said, "No." And they said, why not? You're an environmental lawyer. I said, because I don't think that's the best thing to, I mean, somebody should teach it, but I don't want to. I want to teach conflict resolution. And starting in 1990, I created this course, which I taught every year until 2018. So, it sort of frames my entire approach to all of this. And this is a variation of that theme, but this is really what I get up every morning thinking about. So, my professional experience tells me that you can't really resolve, excuse me, any significant public policy issue unless you're interested and willing to talk to folks, at least at the outset, who disagree with you. You cannot live in a silo and engage the other side. We are a 50-50 country. I think the election polling doesn't make much sense except the one that occurred in November. That poll says we're a 50-50 country. And so you cannot resolve any significant policy matter, whether it's environmental or anything else, unless you are willing to engage those who disagree with you. In 2000, a guy named Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. Anybody read Bowling Alone?
Yeah, boy, I did. I heard him speak at Chautauqua, and it was really major.
So, so Bowling Alone, for those of you who are not familiar with the work, chronicles a phenomenon that occurred starting in the 60s, where people just literally disengaged from civic activity. It was a long, slow process, but folks just sort of stopped going to clubs. They stopped engaging with their school boards. They just withdrew from civic engagement altogether. His metaphor was bowling. He said the bowling actually was increasing. The number of people that bowled was increasing, but bowling leagues were decreasing. And so that made his point. People are doing things on their own without engaging with their neighbors. And he said that is much to the detriment of a well-functioning democracy. You cannot do that. You need civic engagement to have a well-functioning democracy. So that gets us to polarization. A lot of folks, and I'm guessing a fair number in this room, would think that polarization was caused by Donald Trump. And it was not. Donald Trump simply highlighted and shone a light on a dynamic that had been going on, as Robert Putnam had shown, for a generation or more. And so the problem is not an individual. The problem is the dynamic that underlies what Donald Trump and the MAGA movement are doing. So it is important to understand that if you want to try to solve the problem. And so, again, we have all sort of decamped into our silos. And I'm one of those people that do that. So it's more comfortable. But my point today is going to be, we cannot let that happen anymore. We have to actually seek out and engage those who disagree with us and have respectful, meaningful, constructive conversations about the issues we disagree about and see if we can find some way to resolve them. So that's the point. So the question becomes, let's see if we can do this. The question becomes, what is polarization? I pulled this slide from my deck from my Duquesne class. And I think this, to me, shows it perfectly. I mean, it is like a whirlpool from which we cannot escape. If you look at the development, a problem emerges, sides form, communication stops, conflict moves outside of the team, perceptions become distorted, and a sense of crisis emerges. And if you look at the evolution of the issues, I mean, individuals take sides, issues and positions are sharpened, issues become polarized, unrealistic goals are met or advocated, and new ideas are stalemated. And then if you go from there, you can see that there's increased anxiety, intensification of feelings, rumors and exaggerations persist, militant hostility arises, and motivation is based on revenge. Does that sound anything like what's going on right now in this country? I will point out to you that this image is from a book that was published in 1988. Again, makes the point. This has been going on for a while. This has been going on for a while, and it's taken a long time to get to where we are, and it's going to take a little while longer, and some with persistent activity to work our way out of it. So, how do we understand polarization better? You could line the walls of this room with the books and the papers that have been written to try to define polarization, try to identify the problem, try to suggest what the solutions are. I'm going to call your attention to what I think is a fabulous piece of work that is ongoing by Rand Corporation. For those of you who don't know Rand, it is a Washington, D.C. Think tank, has locations around the world. And by the way, don't take notes. There's a photo opportunity at the end. I'm going to have a link for the Rand website that will make all this available to you. They have offices literally around the world. They had a very substantial presence in Pittsburgh, and I got to know the Rand folks because I was working on behalf of clients on projects that they were involved with, and I got to know them. And one time, it was sometime in the campaign of Donald Trump, the president, Michael Rich, came to Pittsburgh, and we had a meeting, and he said, I'm observing what's going on in this campaign. And he said, it's completely devoid of any reference to truth and fact and analysis and independent views. Folks have their alternative facts, as Kellyanne Conley famously said one time. He said, I have this idea that I call that truth decay. Pretty clever label for it. He called it truth decay. I have this idea to form a project within Rand to study this, and they launched a project. So he and a woman named Jennifer Kavanaugh put together a book, and they published it in 2018 on the formation and the preliminary evaluation of truth decay. And this is the synthesis. Whoops, I haven't going to move. This is a synthesis of their findings. Now you can read this book online, and again, I will at the very end give you a slide that has the link to this. But you can look at it online for free. You can buy the book if you want to, but you can look at it online for free, and all of the follow-on work that came from it. But this is the synthesis of the Rand analysis, and I think this is some of the best analysis that I've seen. They identified 4 trends: disagreement about facts and data. Somebody will say, "You said that's a fact." That's not a fact. And some of it is pretty clearly fact, but people are just not willing to agree with it. The blurring the lines between opinion and fact. Think about all cable news. That is a blurring of the line. But most cable news, what they present as news is opinion. Most of it, whether it's MSNBC, CNN, Fox, it's almost all opinion. Very little news. Increasing the relative volume and resulting influence of opinion over fact. So people want to substitute the opinion for the facts. Declining trust in the sources of analysis and fact. That's why Rand got into this, because that's their business. They do analysis, and if people aren't going to believe their analysis, that's a problem for them. That's literally why Rand got involved in this. So those are the 4 trends they identified. Then if you look above that, the drivers are cognitive processing and cognitive biases. We all look for references that affirm what we think we already believe, and we don't challenge our beliefs enough. And so that's just a common human trait. Changes in the information system. And over here under agents, this list on the right side under agents talks about some of those. Obviously, the fact that there is no longer a fairness doctrine in television, the fact that there are cable news 24/7 operations going on trying to pitch a point of view and not simply facts. Social media, Artificial intelligence is now on scene. It was going on, but it hadn't exploded in 2018 like it has now. Artificial intelligence is now part of all of this. And so those are all agents of the change in the information system. Competing demands in education. I mean, you have interference from governments into what schools can and cannot teach. We have different views of what history is, what should be taught, what should not be taught. We have differences of view about what the Constitution means and things like that. That's all those are sort of loaded onto the education system. What can you teach in those areas? And sometimes it's being dictated by government and not by educators. And then obviously polarization, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And the consequences are, erosion of discourse, political paralysis, alienation. Again, it sounds kind of like what's going on today, right? The book then launched what the RAND research agenda was going to be. And these are the topics, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but most of them are at the institutional or systemic level. The one I want to talk about is bridging social divides, because I think that is something that we all in this room can do. And so the question is, how do you bridge a social divide? And there are a lot of organizations now called bridging organizations. There's probably several dozen, and it's growing by the day. There's a new one that seems to show up on my email feed every day. The one I want to talk about is the one I'm affiliated with, which is Braver Angels. Braver Angels is a bridging organization. And so Braver Angels was founded in 2017 as Better Angels. And some people say, well, is there any kind of a religious affiliation with this? And I said, it's not. Better Angels is inspired by Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address, where he called upon what was obviously a very divided nation in 1861 to have the citizens touch each other's better angels. And that was the inspiration for the name. The name was changed to Braver Angels in 2020 because, as it turns out, there is a Better Angels Foundation, which funds a lot of the Ken Burns work on PBS, all his documentaries, and they claimed the right to the name, and they said it was an infringement for this organization to use the name. So they changed it to Braver Angels, and so that's how the name arose. But it was founded by three guys, Bill Doherty from Minnesota, David Blankenhorn from New York, and a guy named David Lapp from Ohio. They all had conflict resolution backgrounds. And they all sort of made the same observation that Michael Rich made. What's going on? I mean, why can't we talk to each other anymore? And so they said, we should do something about that. And so they founded Better Angels, now Braver Angels, in 2017. It is not an anti-MAGA organization. It is an organization that strives to balance points of view. And so, whoops. There we go. That's actually, I didn't push the button enough. That's the research agenda for RAND. And this is now the founding of Braver Angels. And now this is their mission. Bringing Americans together to bridge partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. And the vision is to, we envision an America that respectfully embraces political disagreements. Now, look at the action words there. I mean, they want you to bring Americans together. That takes action. They want to respectfully embrace political disagreements. So this is very much about engaging with your fellow citizens, whether they agree with you or not. And frankly, the point of Braver Angels is to bring together folks who disagree and have them talk to each other in a respectful way. So I would say, well, I was a lawyer and a conflict resolution practitioner. So most mornings I got up and said, all right, who am I going to encounter today that's not going to agree with me? And that was my job. And so I'm very comfortable in that context. A lot of people are not. And so if you are going to ask people to go out and encounter people that disagree with them, you have to put them into some sort of comfort zone. You have to teach them how to do things in a way that will make them comfortable doing that. So early in my Duquesne class, I would always administer to the students one of these conflict style instruments. Some of you may have done these. One's the Myers-Briggs type indicator. One's the Thomas Kilmann instrument. And there was another one that was sort of a modification of those by a guy named Richard Schell, who put it in his book called Bargaining for Advantage, which is one of the books I used in my class. But nonetheless, these basically ask you a bunch of questions and then it types you into a conflict resolution style. And those are avoiding, competing, accommodating, compromising, collaborating. The most prominent response by all my students was avoiding. And these were not lawyers. This was not in law school. These were science students. So the most prevalent response in all of my classes was avoiding. I think that is also expressed by the dynamic we're seeing on. We all have sort of decamped to our silos to avoid engaging with somebody who disagrees with us. And so the question is, how do you make yourself comfortable not avoiding and actually embracing the conflict, or embracing the difference of point of view, and having a conversation with somebody who you know does not agree with you? And so that's what the Braver Angels approach is all about. And so as individuals, we try to understand the other side's point of view, even if we do not disagree with it. And there are techniques to be able to do that, which is one of the things that Braver Angels teaches. In our communities, we engage with those who disagree. Again, we engage with those who disagree. We actively seek out people we disagree with and engage with them. And in politics, we support principles that bring us together rather than divide us. So real quickly, this is Braver Angels. It's a nonprofit member organization. There are probably more than 15,000 members. That's the last published figure they had. It's volunteer led. There are very few paid staff. It's almost all volunteers. And it is purposely cross-partisan, which means that in everything they do, they try to have an equal representation of what they call reds and blues. I'm a red. So if I were going to do something, I would have a blue counterpart as part of the leadership of whatever project or workshop I'm working on. So they try to equally divide it. They are pretty good at doing that at the organizational level. At the membership level, not so much. Right now, the membership level is probably 65 to 75% blue, with a distinct minority being red. And they're working on trying to figure out how to balance that out. But organizationally and structurally, they try to do everything in a balanced way. So they have a whole bunch of workshops. This is where you learn something. This is where you begin to have the skills, to teach the skills that allow you to be comfortable having a conversation with somebody who you disagree with. I'm not going to go through all of them, but depolarizing within, if anybody were interested in having a workshop here, and I'm a moderator, there are a couple of other moderators in Southwest Florida that can be part of this. We could have a workshop, and I would suggest the first one would be depolarizing within. Because if you're in a conflict or if you're in a disagreement with somebody, the person you can control the most is yourself. You can't control yourself perfectly, but you have a better chance of controlling yourself than the other party that you're engaged with. And so it's really important to learn about yourself and learn about what your own internal polarization is or may be. And so that's what this is all about. There are red-blue engagement workshops, disagreeing better, common ground. So there are all these workshops that are on their portfolio that will all teach skills, and more importantly, I think, give you the opportunity to practice the skills. I'm a golfer, right? So I take lessons. And a lesson basically breaks down your swing into little micro segments and then gives you swing thoughts. If I go play around at golf and I'm thinking about the little mini micro segments and the swing thoughts, I'm going to have a terrible round. You have to practice it to the point where it's ingrained. And that's the same thing with these principles of conflict resolution. You have to practice them until they became sort of second nature to you, and you don't have to think about them. They just sort of automatically kick into gear. So there's some others. One-on-one conversations is an interesting one. They basically pair people up, a red and a blue, and say, all right, here's a topic, to talk about it. That's outside the workshop. And usually you have to have a number of workshops under your belt before you can really do this one effectively, but that's a really interesting one. So now I'm going to give you, this is one skill from the Depolarizing Within workshop. And it's called LAP. And LAP stands for listen, acknowledge, pivot, and offer a perspective. If you can do that effectively, you can have a constructive conversation with people that disagree with you. It's that simple. It's easier said than done, but if you can use this technique to listen attentively, so-called active listening, where you acknowledge you've heard and understood what they have told you, because that's the important part. Your counterpart has to understand or feel that you have listened to them and you understand what they're saying. And once they do that, then you begin to develop a little bit of a relationship with them. And then you pivot by saying, all right, let's think about it this way. And you begin to turn the conversation around respectively, not argumentatively, but respectfully. And then you offer a perspective that is different from the one that you heard and see if how they will respond to that perspective. If you can do this effectively, you can have a conversation comfortably with anybody who disagrees with you. So that's just one of the skills that are taught in the Depolarizing Within workshop. So the next thing, and this is the important one, I think, because you can do these workshops, and again, to some extent, you're still in a silo, but you can create an alliance. And alliances are basically their name for chapters. And if you have an alliance, you can basically create your own agenda, your own program, offer Braver Angels workshops, offer other workshops from other sources, and then focus on community issues, things that are relevant to you, particularly in your community. It's got a community focus. It's basically to practice the skills you're learning and to model the Braver Angels approach in the community. One thing that, if you remember a while back on a preceding slide, I talked about Walk a Mile in My News. That is an alliance product that was created by a person in the Sacramento, California Alliance, and it is now being used around, but that was a product that was developed in an alliance. And so that shows you, and that's a really fascinating thing. I mean, if you are a devotee of CNN or MSNBC, and that's what your main source of TV public opinion is, I would challenge you to go watch Fox. And watch Fox. You won't watch it for as much time, but watch Fox for a second, and you will think you are in two different worlds. It's not so much about what they say, it's about what they cover. The loop of what they cover is dramatically different between Fox and CNN and MSNBC. The day after President Carter died, if you were watching Fox, you'd be hard pressed to know that he died if that was your only source of news, because it just wasn't covered. There'd be a little 30-second blip as they were going to a commercial. Oh yeah, by the way, President Carter died. It was wall to wall on CNN and MSNBC. That's all they talked about. And so if you're watching them, you would not know anything else was going on in the world. So, I mean, it's really, the Walk a Mile in My News is really an interesting technique. So there are a whole bunch of other Braver Angels. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just flip through these. And so to sum up, we are living in troubling times for sure. There's complicating factors that didn't exist. I mean, we've been in troubling times, but there was no social media during the Civil War. There was no artificial intelligence going on. I mean, so there are complicating factors, and the fact that over time we've allowed ourselves to be siloed is another one of those complicating factors. And so Joe Biden 2 days ago gave this quote. He was awarding the Presidential Citizens Medals, and he said, "It's pretty damn simple. Our democracy begins and ends with the duties of citizenship. A duty, again, infers action. You have a duty to do something affirmative and not simply rest in your silo." being more than a safe harbor is no longer an option. I think to help fix democracy, save democracy, we all have to become active and engaging with folks who we disagree with. And so I will leave you with, this is the full quote from Abraham Lincoln that the name that inspired the name of Better Angels. And again, it's the main point is that he was urging the citizens of the United States to touch each other's better angels. And so that is the point. And here's the photo op I promised you. This is the reference to the RAND. This is the reference to the RAND website. If you get to that link, you will have available to you the entire body of the RAND Truth Decay work, including the base report, and the research goes on. They continue to roll out papers and books, and all of that's available at that site. And then the Braver Angels website is below it. So with that, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and engaging with the panel.
Thanks, Jack. We did actually have 3 speakers today, and one had a family emergency, so that just gives it more time for you guys. The next speaker is, and I'm going to give a caveat of, I'm probably going to mispronounce several words during this, Dr. Jan-Martijn. I think of him as John Mayer. That's the way I can get that together. He's FGCU's Interim Director of the Office of Public Policy Events and the Program Coordinator for the Sociology program within the Department of Justice Studies. He has a degree in sociology with specializations in environmental sociology, social inequality, and social psychology from Oklahoma State University, and an MA in international business strategy and marketing from Radboud University. He also has a bachelor's of economics from Hogeschool, a college in the Netherlands in a town I cannot pronounce. Take it away, John.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. It's impressive. 9 a.m. on a Saturday in January, so I'm glad we have a nice audience. Let me start by saying a little bit about Liberty. She unfortunately can't make it today. She was part. She's one of our amazing students at FGCU, and she was part of a class that partook in kind of a similar approach as Braver Angels, but it's called Unify America, where you can sign up. You can do it individually. You can do it as a class project, and you identify. Let's put it further away. Yeah. But basically you register and you're either conservative or liberal, and then you meet with somebody else in the country from a different perspective. Based on that, she and her class organized 2 events last fall where people, it was done right the week before Thanksgiving, to have difficult conversations across politics and religion. So unfortunately, she couldn't be here today to share that, but I wholeheartedly recommend you checking out Unify America. My role is I'm a sociologist, and I'm served this year as the director of the Office of Public Policy Events, which is kind of aiming to do what we're here for today. So let me say a little bit about the office. It is part of a state mandate. Florida has required each university to organize 2 events in the fall, 2 events in the spring that focuses on a contentious issue that reasonable people can have disagreement on. And the requirement is to have at least 2 speakers from across ideology. To me, this is kind of what we do in academia. There's a lot of noise about academia, but we engage with data. We explore different perspectives. So I'm glad about this opportunity. I hope to see you at some of these events. We need to finalize the dates for the spring, but likely one of the topics will be about substance abuse and whether or not it should be treated as a criminal justice issue or a public health issue. In the fall, we brought Dr. Nolan Hickton, who is an expert in critical media literacy and a co-author of a book that I I really recommend you to check out. It's called Let's Agree to Disagree, which is about the importance of civil discourse, about the importance of meeting with people that think differently and disagree with you. We also had our post-election panel with it. My goal is to make this, rather than the 2 events each semester, I think this should be a monthly event. And for that to work, we need people from the community. We need people from campus interacting with one another. So yeah, that's about that. There is 3 things. I want to keep my comments short because I think the most interesting thing is questions from the audience and basically engaging with one another. But I want to make 3 points. And the first one is kind of similar to what Jack was saying. It didn't start with Trump. I'm going to talk a little bit about this topic based on the 2024 election. And then to really take the countering perspective, make 2 recommendations. One is to move away from social media to face-to-face interactions like we're having today. Social media is part of the problem of why we perceive that we're polarized, and the key word is perceive. We are divided, we have different viewpoints, but we're not as polarized as you may think about that. Social media is a potential wonderful technology, but currently it is a platform that is owned by billionaires and they're aimed for making revenue. And the only way to make revenue is to basically heighten polarization and heighten difference. The other thing too, that social media prevents us from doing. So if I say something that's really stupid or just blatantly wrong, you can tell me right now, and you know, it's easier for me to say like, oh my God, I got this wrong. I'm sorry for saying that, right? It's much easier to do that. If we were online and I post something, hundreds, thousands, millions of people see what I wrote, and you say what you said is wrong. Now I'm going to dig in, right? Because the cost is much higher. And then the second countering is critical media literacy. I share this TED Talk with all of my students every semester. It is a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. He probably self-identifies as conservative, but his work is highly relevant. He did this TED Talk in the early 2000s, and he addressed the moral roots of liberals and conservatives. And guess what? We have the same values. Conservatives and liberals care about justice, freedom, fairness. We just define it differently. And so rather than thinking that we don't care about the same things, we need to have these conversations. So it's about a 20-minute TED Talk. I highly recommend it to watch that. So something about the election. So as an educator, this is something that really frightens me. These were popular Google searches on the election day, right? 2024 election, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, the death of democracy. This is the last time you get to vote. You know, lots of money was being spent. You know, billions of dollars. All these things. And guess 2 popular searches. Is Joe Biden running for president? Months after he had dropped out. Who is running for America for president? And here's the other interesting thing. There was an increase when the election started on how do I change my vote? And so, you know, sometimes I see people being shocked, sometimes people laugh, but to me, this kind of shows the importance, right, of we might think, and my gut feeling is you knew who was running for president, right? That's why you're here today. You stay informed. That's not true for a lot of the country. And so that's an opportunity, right, to sort of educate. The other thing too is, and Jack made this point, this didn't start with Trump, but a concerning, I mean, I also volunteer as an election worker. And so this is concerning to me that like pretty much every election, 1 in 3 eligible voters stay home. And there's a lot of analysis about what groups voted for Trump, what groups voted for Harris. To me, I'm more interested in knowing who is the third of the people that stay home and for what reason, right? Is it that they don't care? It's possible. Is it that they are somehow prevented? I mean, there are, there's another shock, but like there is posters being distributed in different neighborhoods saying if you have outstanding parking tickets, you get arrested. Election is moved from the first Tuesday in November to the second Tuesday of November. If you don't, you know, there's all sorts of things with this. Do they not feel represented? My gut feeling tells me it's probably that part. A lot of people don't feel represented. But as you can see, you know, and in some states the turnout is better. But even in Pennsylvania, that, you know, Pennsylvania was listed as that's the state that will determine the election. 70% turnout. So 30% of people in Pennsylvania that would determine who would win the White House stayed home, right? So, and as you can see, this is a 50-50 country. I mean, Donald Trump won, what is it, 48% of the vote. Kamala Harris got 46% of the vote. Electoral College paints a much larger victory, but the country is fundamentally 50-50. So, and yes, it didn't start with Trump. Here's the other thing too. So there's a lot of pieces that came out that basically said, you know, the death of democracy. And guess what? 70% of people that voted in November are concerned about democracy. But look at the breakdown in party. They're not all Democrats. In fact, the majority of people that voted for Trump were concerned about the death of democracy. And so, you know, are there challenges, are there potential things there? Sure. But if we're talking in these overly dramatic terms, right, you're not gonna get people to your side. But this also shows, right, that this is a concern for most Americans, whether they are pro or anti-Trump, about democracy. Same with the economy. 70% of voters were concerned about the economy. I highly recommend Pew Research. It's an excellent source of data. But this is another one where prior to the election, I kind of saw this coming, and people were sort of shocked. And it's like, you know, how can people vote for this person, or how can people vote against that person? But if you look at the perception of Americans, they were not clear about what policy stances Kamala Harris had, whereas for Donald Trump, the voters thought he made it much clearer. Whether this is true or not true doesn't matter in my eyes. This is the reality. And so it probably is because we are unfriending people because they vote differently. And if you can see on you know, some very key important issues, you know, people care about those. So there's an opportunity there to sort of do that. Same with impact, right? If this person gets elected, you know, marginalized communities are going to suffer. Well, both sides say that, right? And so, you know, pick your favorite demographics to focus on. You know, the voters perceive positive, negative impacts for sort of both candidates. And so how do we do that, right? Let's see. This is my little hope, that anytime I feel like, you know, the problems are so large, 90% of people that voted for Donald Trump, 86% of people that voted for Kamala Harris want the president to be a president for all Americans, even if it means disappointing the base. And so, you know, when you see social media, when you see the media, especially for sort of, you know, Trump supporters, right? You don't get that perception. But if you look at the data, it is a little bit more nuanced. So I mentioned shift from social media. This is a challenge I'm dealing with myself. You know, you see somebody post something and you're like, this is just wrong. This person is wrong. And one of the challenges is the vast majority, we now have evidence for this, the vast majority of interactions you see on the internet isn't us, it's in real people, it's bots, it's artificial intelligence, it's algorithms. So you might see my picture on a Facebook or on a Twitter post, and it may even have my title, and it may say Fort Myers. But the chances are much more likely that that person that you see that's linked in Fort Myers doesn't exist. We call that the dead internet theory. It's in newspaper comments, it's on product reviews, it's on other elements. And because most of those bots essentially want to heighten conflict and heighten anxiety. So let me give you an example. What would happen? So if you post on social media a lot about, you know, the police is under attack, immigrants are destroying the country, they will say, come to the Collaboratory at 9 a.m. on Saturday for a pro-police, pro-border security rally. At the same time, if you post a lot about immigrant rights, the police is doing heightened violence, come to the Collaboratory on Saturday at 9 a.m. Right? It's essentially there to heighten that conflict. The other thing to do is critical media literacy. I recommend this book by Nolan Hickton. He wrote about fake news, and it gives a toolkit in the final chapter and asks some of those questions. So one of the challenges that we have seen in our media is I'm a big fan of investigative reporting, critical journalism. We need those regardless of political position. But right now, the way news organizations make money is ads. It used to be that 80% of the revenue for news organizations came from subscriptions. Every place in the country had a conservative newspaper and a liberal newspapers. Those have all disappeared. Part of it is our problem. We want everything for free. We want our content for free. And so news organizations, right, in order to get attention, in order to get revenue, need sensationalist headlines. Donald Trump kicks a puppy. Governor DeSantis rescues drowning woman in the water, right? It is these heightened clickbaity articles, and most of us don't even look. We share it. Say, see, Governor DeSantis is a hero. See, Donald Trump is evil. We don't read the story. NPR did this fantastic piece a few years ago on April's Fool. And this is NPR, right? And so you think the people that listen to NPR are educated, are smarter, and the headline said, Americans don't read anymore. And tons of people shared it. See, I told you so. When you clicked on the article, it says it's not true. Americans are reading more than ever before. So especially when it has this emotional content, right? We got to ask these questions, and you can find tons of resources. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has some really good questions. I wholeheartedly endorse what Jack said. Is like, if you're pro-Trump, watch. In fact, stay away from corporate news sources. Go to independent news sources, but watch across perspective. I meet a lot of people that are like shocked. How can people vote for this person? And if you watch the news sources that they watch, you will be shocked why you didn't vote for that person, and vice versa, right? This is why we need to interact with people around me. the people, when I interact with people that are pro or anti-Trump online, it's a much different interaction than when I meet them in my communities. And so there's an opportunity there. So let's see if I can get this. I don't know. Okay. It's not letting me go to the last slide. Let's see. There we go. So I will end with some facts, mostly based on the election, because that's when we have this heightened element. It is important to look at facts, not rumors. Changing the Constitution, right, requires a particular process. In fact, I mean, we're the League of Women Voters, the Equal Rights Amendment, right, met these criteria, and it still hasn't been solidified. So are there ideas suggested to change the Constitution? Sure. Is there a potential to do that? Yes, but it's currently based on the current political landscape. There's not a majority for that to happen. Nominations, they have to be confirmed. Well, we're gonna avoid the nomination process. Again, there's a process for it. In 2016 and 2020, we had to stop the steal movement. In 2024, we saw an increase on people on the left saying, like, there's no way. What happened to those extra 10 million people that voted for Biden? Where did they go in 2024? And again, you know, in the last couple of elections, there's not credible evidence that the vote was inaccurate. So we got to focus on the facts, which is easier said than done. So yeah, and engage with people that think differently. Avoid stereotypes. It doesn't mean that stereotypes aren't real. It doesn't mean that there aren't bad faith actors, but most people, I think, are good faith actors on this. So I look forward to hearing your questions, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan and Jack. I think that they distributed some cards for you guys to write questions on, so we definitely would like to get those picked up and come around. For those of you on Zoom, if you can put your questions in the chat box, then we'll be able to get some of your offsite questions as well. So while we're gathering, we've had a few questions prepared beforehand that we've gotten from League of Women Voters, and they've been kicked around. So I'll just give out one while we're organizing questions from the audience. And Jack and Jan, this is for both of you. Can you give an example of a personal interaction and how you intervened or responded during a politically charged conversation? Jack, you want to start?
Sure. The key is really to listen. And that's the starting point. And I will say, by the way, of those 5 styles that I mentioned earlier, avoiding, collaborating, compromising, competing, accommodating, there's no single most effective style for every situation. They are styles that should be used when they are the effective one. And sometimes avoiding is the right style. Sometimes. I mean, if you get involved in a matter where somebody is just not going to pay attention, not listen, and just rant and rant and rant, then it probably is time to withdraw. That's not to say you shouldn't try to get engaged, but at some point you just have to say the best thing to do here is withdraw and let the thing cool down. But if you listen and you express you've heard what they're saying, and they believe that, you can get them to believe that, then things that will tend to neutralize the heat a little bit and start to begin to have a conversation. And then the question becomes what the pivot is, and then when you begin to pivot and start with a different perspective, how they respond. So it's a process, and it's a practiced art. So I think the thing to say in the outset is like, all right, I can see you're upset about something, and I can understand perhaps why you're upset. Let's talk about it. And that's the way to cool things down.
So I'm from the Netherlands, and we call this Dutch directness. Americans often call it rude, but in the Netherlands, it is considered important that people talk about politics and religion. In fact, those are the topics we talk with strangers about. And we think it's kind of avoiding things. And so it is considered rude in the Netherlands to not have a viewpoint. And so that requires, right, to do work on that. So I've got plenty of examples on this. My advice, I mean, listening certainly is a key one. It is thinking about what do you want to focus your time on, right? Is this a random stranger online? You know, who cares? Again, I need to take my own advice on that. But if it's, you know, if you have a divided political family where half of your family is pro-Trump and the other half of the family is anti-Trump, and you love your family, maybe we're not going to talk about how to fix immigration over Thanksgiving, right? However, you know, if that's where you want to set your boundary, you know, that's a decision you have to make. So you know, pick your battles, and also think about, I mean, what is the relationship you want to have with people?
All right. So first question from the audience. How does the US compare to Western European countries with regard to the level of polarization? You just answered that for one country.
There is, you know, you've heard about the deep state runs everything. Those are comments made in the Netherlands and Germany, and most European countries have the same polarization, the same division as we have in the United States. There's one major caveat between the Netherlands and the United States. We have about, any election, we have about 10 to 15 parties in parliament. So there's usually 4 or 5 larger parties, whereas here in the US, it is, you know, you're blue or red, which is part of the problem. But yeah, the polarization is there. The concerns about COVID restrictions, whether or not the vaccine is real, whether or not Fauci should be arrested, whether or not Elon Musk. It's a popular topic on Dutch social media how Elon Musk is a hero in the Netherlands. So polarization is there. I mean, it's the same challenges as we see in the United States, with some, you know, unique differences perhaps, but yeah.
I think generally speaking, one of the problems, I should clarify, I'm a red. I consider myself to be a conservative institutionalist. The MAGA movement are anti-institutional populists. Now, I think one of the challenges is that our institutions have gone into their own silos and they don't really interact enough with the general population. And I think that's felt in the general population, that A, they're not elected, nor should they be, by the way. I mean, do you want the Congress talking about really serious scientific problems? I don't think so. Or serious medical problems. I mean, there's a role for them, but I think one of the challenges is the institutionalists have sort of insulated themselves in the bureaucracy. And I think that is one of the things that is a part of the problem. And I think it's one of the things that institutions generally need to be reformed. And by the way, that's on the RAND research list, how institutions remake themselves. That's on their research agenda. So that's one of the things they've already thought about. And I think that's an important part to, I mean, there is some truth to the fact that institutions don't necessarily connect with the general population.
All right. Next question is for you, Jack. How many conservatives participate in these activities in Florida? When you talked about the percentage of 75-25, what is that in Florida specifically? Do you know?
Okay, so Braver Angels has some statistics, and obviously Florida is probably not a 50-50 place. The country may be a 50-50 place, but Florida is right now not a 50-50 place. But to Jan's point, that doesn't mean that at the very basic level, the values are that much different. People are concerned about the same things. It's just they express themselves differently and they have their own sort of target list of things that they really are upset about. But it's Florida's got a really, really good start. They had a state coordinator who was very dynamic. He's a personal friend of mine. We became a personal friend of mine once I moved to Florida. And he basically took it as far as he could go and was burned out. And so he stepped back. There is a new state coordinator who's trying to gin up effort. There are only 2 alliances in Florida, which is one of the things I'm trying to fix. I would like to have an alliance in Southwest Florida. I really would. I think Southwest Florida could have an alliance, and I would really like to see one start here because that's when you can really become dynamic and focus on things that matter to your locality and to your region. And so I think that's where I would like this to go. I mean, in my mind, I think the thought is get some folks who are become familiar with Braver Angels, take the workshops, get something out of it, agree with it. They form an alliance and then the alliance broadens. So I think probably the statistic of 3-to-1, 2-to-1, which is national, is probably more like 4 or 5-to-1 in Florida in terms of participation and by Reds. We have a Red Caucus in Braver Angels, and there are a handful of Floridians who are in the Red Caucus, but it's way underrepresented, and so we need to figure out how to. And like I said, Braver Angels has got a research project trying to figure out how to develop the tools and the messaging to get Reds interested, and I think that's part of the challenge we have here. But I think it's one that I'm interested in taking on.
Great. And we've had several questions along this line, and you just responded to it in part, but Jan, maybe you have some more comments. How can we better return to conversations locally and individually? Part definitely is Braver Rangers, but other thoughts?
I think trust that the people that disagree with you are good faith actors and give them an opportunity to explain. So I use the example of the border in my class. If somebody says, you know, we need to build a wall between Mexico and the United States, calling that person automatically xenophobic and a racist is just simply not true. Some probably are, but there might be some legitimate concerns, right? And so asking questions. It's you know, if those of you that are parents, you probably had the annoying kid that would ask why, but why, but why. As adults, we stop doing that. You say we need to build a wall. Oh, you're a racist. Bye. So looking for data. There isn't there's a single political standpoint that I can think of that doesn't have some factual basis. No, the challenge comes after that, right? Because factual basis, you know, for 2 different political positions requires us to address it. But when we start with the facts, the rest can follow. I mean, people were saying the day after Joe Biden was inaugurated, the border is open and millions of people are across the border. Where are the videos? But also, right, I mean, how do we know this, right? And so if millions of people are suddenly coming across the border, we either have a very good border security because we capture them, or we have border security just letting them through. Right. And so, but it's sort of easy to do that. Ask for evidence, especially if the information you hear seems to resonate with you. You know, so yeah, have conversations, look at data, see where people are coming from, and ask questions. Journalists get this training in sort of school where if you hide your own political stances, you hear a lot of people. I've interacted with people where, like, in one day, I hear somebody, you know, making all sorts of things that are pro-Trump, and then I go around the corner and I hear things that are anti-Trump, and both of those people need to talk to each other, but they talk to me, but not not to each other. So ask questions, give people an opportunity. And then if they give you evidence that they're a bad faith actor or that they have despicable viewpoints that you think are despicable, then move on. But don't assume that just because somebody says something, don't reach that conclusion. That was my advice.
Thanks.
Let me add one thing. I think to pick up on something that Jan said earlier, if it's a completely chance encounter, and right now most of the chance encounters occur on social media, but even if it's an in-person chance encounter, there's a segment in my class I taught, and I don't want to teach my class in the however much time we have left, but I mean, there's a relationship between relationships and the strength of the relationship and how the parties react to each other. And so if you want to say, how do we have better conversations with our neighbors and the local community, I think the starting point is to start with building a relationship with them. And if you're going to do that, you don't start with the hot button issues is the first thing you want to talk about. You start talking about other things and you show that you're not reactive. You show that you listen. You show that you hear. You show that you are willing to have a constructive conversation, and you, over a period of time, create a relationship where then you feel comfortable talking about some of the things where you would disagree with people about. I think that's how you start. And I think there's a difference between a chance encounter relationship, which is completely, ephemeral, and at the other end of my spectrum in my class was a compulsory relationship. So your family is a compulsory relationship, right? You only have one family and you don't have a choice. That's your family. And so, yeah, there are problems with the polarization and polarization within families too. The approach there is entirely different. You have to sort of work on that because the relationship's there. But if you're talking about just neighbors and friends and acquaintances, then I think you've got to build the relationship first and make sure that the other party knows that you are not going to be reactive. You're not going to jump down their throat for them saying something, and that the conversation will be constructive and that you will listen. I think those are the ways to start the relationship. And then once you have the relationship going, then you can start talking about things you disagree with.
All right. Thank you. I think we have a question on chat.
Yeah, we actually have two. So the first one is in regard to Braver Angels. Why do you think there's 75% of the membership is blue?
I think that is a problem beyond Braver Angels. I think if you were to look at the demographics of the Citizens Climate Lobby, the other group that I'm involved in, I think you would find the same thing. I think that the blues far outnumber the reds. Even though it is nonpartisan. I mean, it is on its face nonpartisan, and it's supposed to be not. But I think if you were to, and there are red groups within Braver Angels or in Citizens Climate Lobby, but I think you would find the same thing. And I was up at another organization called Conversations Across the Aisle up in Sarasota. It was founded by a guy who was with the New College here in Florida and is now retired, I think, from that. And he started this project where they basically have dinner meetings and they have a topic and and they try to arrange the tables so that you have people with different points of view and you have conversations across the aisle. Well, they invited me up to one of them, and so I went up. They're having the same challenge. They said these are all blue folks. You might be the only red one in the room. And so it is kind of, it's a challenge. And I don't know why. Part of it may be that reds, I don't know. I can speculate, but I don't know why. I think Braver Angels is trying to do some research. They've got some funding to do some research as to why that is, but it is sort of a ubiquitous challenge. The blues seem to be more prone and interested in doing these kinds of things. Reds, not so much. I don't know why.
So the second question, social media certainly has created a big issue for civic engagement with so much misinformation. People often complain without wanting to be engaged or understanding the issues. What would you say could be the role of government to create more engagement?
I think government should stay out of it. I think the important role is, so I'm going to try to sum it up in a short answer. So we have this whole conversation about, misinformation, whether government should censor social media companies, and there's three solutions, right? One solution is government creates some kind of task force. That means Donald Trump right now gets to decide what is considered misinformation and fake news. If AOC becomes president in 4 years, she gets to decide it. I don't think government should have that say in it. I think individual platforms can have their own rules. Likewise, requiring or expecting that Facebook is gonna self-regulate. They want to make money, right? And misinformation and fake news generates revenue, right? So the only solution in my mind is critical media literacy. That is taking this into our own hands, learning about what are the facts, what is true, what is not true. That requires a lot of work. And yes, echo chambers and confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance are factors that we have to confront. But I also don't know what the government can do to avoid this, because half the country is going to say, "Oh, I trust what the government says," and other half will stay far away and find their own sources. So then I also have a thought about why maybe we see this split. And I wonder if it has to do with the fact that conservatives, what is the number one value for conservatives? It's individualism, right? What is the number one value for Democrats? It's community. And so I wonder if maybe there's some kind of a component in it. I mean, why do you see so many people on the left go into social sciences and humanities? It's because it moves into the quote unquote greater good. Why do you see so few conservatives in those fields? It's not because the fields are hostile, but it's a very different thing. If in sociology, right, we talk about structural inequality. To conservatives, that is like, it's like, no, it's individual bad apples and it's individual hard work. So I wonder if maybe that plays a role.
I would agree with Jan. I think any effort by the government to do something by command and control would be futile and counterproductive. I think that would be the worst thing you could possibly think of doing. There are a couple of other things, though. When social media emerged, the Federal Communications Commission had rules about what liability there is for people that are in the communications business, newspapers, TV stations, radio stations. There are rules, and if you are biased or if you say something slanderous, I mean, you could be sued for libel. When the social media companies were formed, they got a pass on that. I think it's section 231 of the Federal Communications Regulations that basically say they are not publishers, they are simply platforms for other people to publish. And so they got a pass on liability. There's been a lot of discussion and several efforts to change that rule and say, look, you're no longer a fledgling industry. I mean, you guys are behemoths now. You punch way above your weight, basically, in society. If you permit some, and so they always say, well, yeah, but we're just platforms. We don't. But if you think about it, the algorithms do the same thing as an editor in a newspaper. They select what goes out. The algorithms select what goes out. So they are, in fact, doing the same thing as a newspaper or a radio station news, anything like that. I think if you reinstated the liability part of it for the social media companies, hey, I'm a lawyer, right? I love lawsuits, right? No, if you were to do that, I think you would see the market and the legal liability begin to temper some of this stuff. And I think if you're going to do anything in the government, I think that would be what I would suggest you do.
You mean hire Morgan and Morgan? No.
Well, the social media guys will get rich, the lawyers will get rich.
There you go. The next question I like because it brings it down really personal. I think sometimes role modeling is good. I want to better understand my Trump neighbors. We generally talk about non-hot topics. How do I go to the next step?
Well, somebody's going to have to take the step to have the conversation. And so, I mean, if you set it up so that there are more or less ground rules, I don't think I would call them ground rules, but just say, look, let's talk about this. And, you know, I want to hear what I want to hear what you think. And the emphasis should always be on the other party. I mean, the initiating party should say, I want to hear what you think. And not criticize what they think, listen to what they think, affirm that you've understood what they've said. And that doesn't mean sort of recasting it. That means sort of repeating it and saying, this is what I think I heard you say. And then once you get to the point, you say, okay, they agree, you've heard what I've said, and say, well, can I now tell you sort of my perspective and ask you to hear me out? And I think you can do that. I think that, I mean, and there'll be some folks that it'll go off the rails real quickly, and you'll know that real quickly. And you say, okay, we shouldn't talk about it. But I mean, I think that doesn't mean you should not make the effort. And I believe that once if you have a good enough relationship, if they're long-standing friends or long-standing neighbors, you already have a relationship. You're avoiding the elephant in the room, maybe, in terms of your political views. But if you say, I really want to understand what you're trying to say, or why you think what you think, and if you put the emphasis on them to say, I want to hear what you have to say and understand what you have to say, with the suggestion that it may happen or may not, it may influence the way you think too. I mean, it's almost like you're saying you may cause me to alter my thinking a little bit, but maybe not. But let's start with, I really want to understand why you think what you're thinking, and what is driving. You know, if anybody's familiar with the book Getting to Yes, it's sort of an everlasting book on conflict resolution. They talk about positions and interests. And there's a line, and what you're really trying to get at is the interests. You're trying to get at the interests of what their positions are on political things. And there's a line there that I love. Interests are the silent movers of the hubbub of positions. And so the positions are what people spout and yell and scream and talk about, but their interests might be different. And so what you're really trying to do is get to their interests. Why is it? What is it that makes you think that's important? Or what is it that makes you think that is true? And for the first session, don't even, maybe it takes a second session to say, now can we talk about what I think? Just hear them out and acknowledge that you're hearing and understanding what they're saying. And that's the entry point.
Well, the first question is you gotta ask, what are you hoping to accomplish from that, right? If you have a good relationship with that person, maybe stick to other topics. But the other hand, what I've tried to do is I've tried to get to know people and what do they care about? Do they care about mental health? And I maybe bring it up in this way. It's like, hey, there is this bill being introduced for more funding for mental health. I know that you're passionate about this. What are your thoughts on that? You know, find things that they're passionate about or they care about, and then maybe start that conversation. But it's hard, right? And it comes back to it. What relationship do you want to have with your neighbor? And what is your goal? Is your goal trying to get them to you or to your side? It's probably not going to work, right? But if you want to genuinely understand, asking those questions, you know, it sort of helps.
Thank you. Next question. How can you avoid being sucked into the other person's deflecting to a different topic? Need me to read that one again?
I would consider that. So I would. There's two options there, right? The person is they just have a chaotic mind. I'm one of those people. Or we talk about one topic and suddenly it's something else. Or if the person is trying to do that, that person is a bad faith actor, right? And so if the person keeps changing it and you think it's intentional, then maybe your time is better spent with something else or somebody else.
Jack?
Well, that's sort of like reading the room. I mean, if somebody is sending strong signals that they don't want to talk about it, maybe that is time to say, all right, maybe at a different time. But I want to emphasize, the point is not to avoid as your only recourse. I think we have to continue to try to engage and have these conversations. Sometimes they're not going to work, and sometimes you should then say, all right, let's not pursue this any further. But there are going to be times when it will work, and we need more of those times, frankly, that we all talk to each other respectfully and constructively, and try to say, let's talk through this. And the more times that happens, the better off the country's going to be.
Next question, is AI biased or does it have a nonpartisan response? I know that may not be either one of your wheel wells, but
I think it's both, right? And I think it will continue to develop. I'm actually curious when ChatGPT is going to be connected to the internet. And you ask, so an example that I do in the class is, and I tell them, look, I don't really believe this, but I just want to prove a point. So when people do a Google search, how many pages do you think the average person goes on Google? So if I search like, is the COVID vaccine real? How many pages?
one.
You think one? Top 3. Most people look at the first 3 hits, which oftentimes is Wikipedia or sponsored content. And I gotta be careful how I frame this. But if you, for example, search, is the Holocaust real? Depending on the moment you search, the first 3 pages on Google are all Holocaust denial. And so students, when they do this, are like, but the Holocaust is real. So like, okay, so if you know that, if you're that skeptical and that you go further 3-4 pages into Google for this question, do it for other topics as well. So AI is, we don't know how it's gonna work, but it's gonna, it already makes up results. When students submit a paper from ChatGPT, it makes up sources. It makes up published articles that don't exist. If it's going to be linked to misinformation, right? I mean, it's whatever system feeds it in. So that's it's a challenge, but it's also very seductive, right? I've had people that basically when they have a conflict with their partner, they throw the message from the husband or the wife into ChatGPT. How do I respond to this? Companies do this. And in fact, it will say at the bottom, the content of this email is generated through AI. And so, so I think it's gonna remove our genuine, honest communication. And what is the perfect response? So yeah, I mean, I think it plays a role.
Jack, any?
Well, I try to avoid thinking about AI because I'm scared of it. But my understanding is it basically surveys all recorded content and then summarizes, well, that's going to take some sort of an algorithm, and the algorithm is a function of some human programmers. And so there are biases that are going to be built in one way or the other. And I guess the question is how you regulate the algorithms. And I think it's probably not going to be done by some omnibus government rule. It's going to have to play out, and there's going to have to be some way of resolving the abuses of it. And like I said, I'm a lawyer. My first thought comes to suing somebody. So, but it's which is ironic because that is not how, I mean, I stopped being a litigator a third of the way through my career, but I mean, there are litigation has some useful purposes, and one of them would be to regulate stuff like this, that the government cannot conceive of a rule that would do it effectively. So I think that's part of the process of how that will all evolve.
All right. And last question, how can Lee County Women, the League of Women Voters of Lee County facilitate events to promote depolarization? Braver Angels sounds like an option. Also another question related to an FGCU continuing ed curriculum you already have in place that pairs people, other ideas, how we can bring this forward.
Well, I'll put my Braver Angels hat on. I mean, Braver Angels programs are free. What they find is sponsors who can provide a facility and, you know, the space and do some promotion. And so, one of Braver Angels projects is what's called Braver Networks. And so they look for all kinds of organizations of all in all spheres to work with them on things. And so if you know, there's the two Braver Angels workshops that have been performed here in the Fort Myers, Naples area have both been by UU congregations. And there's a Braver Angels Faith Network initiative as well. So, but I mean, the League of Women Voters, I think, will be the perfect source to say, work to provide some of the support and find, and then the question will become, depolarizing within does not require any balance between reds and blues. It's all about you, and it doesn't make any difference whether you're red or blue. It's really you, and it's sort of an introspective exercise about you. But some of the other ones would require recruiting and finding some reds to balance out the participation.
Yeah, that's what my suggestion would be. Make sure that whatever event you're organizing features people that have different viewpoints. It's essential. And I think the League of Women Voters is, as a nonpartisan organization, has the integrity and credibility for that to do. But if it is just going to be all pro-Trump in the audience or all anti-Trump in the audience, it's not going to work. And so having a good faith program, having people that have different perspectives, different ideas about it. You know, the one event that I would love to organize for the office is the Florida insurance crisis. How do we fix it? It's an actual real problem that is probably getting worse as we speak. And that requires a thoughtful consideration. How do we fix this? And, you know, as important as it is, it probably isn't the most contentious either. So having those real issues in it, should Fort Myers Beach develop into resorts, or should it be for affordable housing? You know, that's a balance. Should we having the real issues that affect the local community, and then having people that have different ideas for this engage in. It doesn't have to be a debate. It could be a forum. It could be it could be genuine engagement, but it only works if there's buy-in from the community and buy-in across difference. Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for your questions. Sandy, do you have a few concluding comments? No, I think my big takeaway is start with small victories and start with your neighborhood, right? Get people used to engaging back and forth, and then take it to the big issues. Go for it.
I'd like to thank our speakers and thank the audience for participating in this. I think we have a lot of ideas and a lot to work on, and there's certainly an interest in this. So I look forward to working with these organizations and all of you in the future. I'm not going to stop and introduce all of our volunteers today, but as one of them, as we were running around, as you saw us today, said it takes a village. We have a lot of people who made this happen today, and I'd like to thank all of you, from putting the panel together to getting the registration, the food, and everything that goes into that. And thank you. A couple of reminders: if you're not registered to vote, please register. Even though we just had an election, now is the time to register for the next election. In Florida, you also need to renew your vote by mail application. So you need to do that before the next election. Now is a good time to do that. And I mentioned earlier, we do have petitions for right to clean water and Medicaid expansion.